Thank you. Next on the agenda, we have Ms. Stephanie Powers, who is the Senior Director for Policy and Partnerships, Council on Foundations. And Ms. Powers, she is the Executive Branch Liaison managing public philanthropic partnerships. Philanthropic, thank you. Partnerships in the Council on Foundations Department of Public Policy and Government Relations. In her work on behalf of the Council's membership, Ms. Powers identifies opportunities to connect foundations and government leverage opportunities for mutual benefit, as well as leadership collaborations with national organizations that can help to advance philanthropic missions. Welcome, Ms. Powers.
Thank you very much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had chocolate and caffeine for this next effort. I did not, because everybody was bending my ear in the last room. So, where am I? I'm in New England, right?
Yes.
The Northeast. Does this include New York, too? And Puerto Rico. That's what I always loved about that region. I always wanted to be a regional administrator, you know, the New York region, because then you could go to Puerto Rico, right? And the Virgin Islands, too. I used to work in the federal government at one time, so. Well, thank you very much. Glad to be here. So I'm here to disabuse you all of the notion that we in the foundation sector have all that money for those 19 programs that General Grass said was running short this morning. So I want to get that right out on the table. So I'm going to talk to you about foundations and what foundations can bring to the table. Not only money, but also partnership and convening power and gravitas to the work of supporting veterans in our communities. And so this very nice gentleman here, Sergeant, right? Sergeant. I'm not a military person either, so Sergeant's going to move the slides for me. So if you would. So where's the camera? Right over here, right? So I thought what I would do initially, this is not a lot of time to really talk about philanthropy, because if you're not familiar with philanthropy, you need to learn about it. How many people have worked in a foundation before? One lone soul back there. I have not even worked in a foundation, but I worked with them for many years. How many people work with foundations in your communities already? Tell me the foundations you're working with. Are you a community foundation mostly, or?
Mine's both a military foundation, Regional Division Veterans Foundation, which offers scholarships and a way to preserve the history of that.
Okay. Set up for that specific purpose then. Yeah. Other foundations people working with? Yes.
I work with the Robin Hood Foundation.
Okay. That's the 800-pound gorilla. Others? Yes.
4-H Foundation.
Oh, the 4-H Foundation.
Highland Foundation, Children's Space. Highland Foundation, Children's Support.
Okay, great. So I want to talk a little bit about understanding the culture of foundations. Understanding the culture is really important to learning how to work with foundations in your community. And the foundations that I think are most pertinent and appropriate for you all with family assistance centers to be working with are the community foundations that are in your communities. There are about 750 community foundations in the nation. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about where they're at and who they are. Also, if we have time, although this half an hour goes very quickly, I've noticed in the last one, but wanted to maybe talk about a little bit with you about how to bring joining community forces to our foundation's community, because we need to know what's needed, who the beneficiaries are, sort of how is the broader community benefited by this whole community forces, joining community forces as well. Things that you need to be thinking about as you're thinking about approaches to foundations. Go ahead. So I am at the Council on Foundations. We're a national association. We're a membership group. We have about 1,700 foundations that belong to us. We run the gamut of, most of our members are these community foundations, which I'll define and you'll see a little bit further on in the presentation. But we also have some of the more typical and usual suspects that you see, you know, after public TV, the Gates Foundation and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Annie E. Casey, John and James L. Knight Foundation. These are private foundations that are among our membership, and we have a contingent of family foundations as well as corporate foundations and giving programs. So our goal, what we do, is we're kind of a hub of this national network of foundations. Our mission is to advance the field of philanthropy. And where it really connects well with the work that you do is that the public sector and the philanthropic sector are both really organized for the common good. We can't quite say that about our partners in the business sector, but we have lots of business people who sit on the boards of trustees for foundations, as well as foundations. Where did they get their money? From the businesses, right? From the business and the money that individuals made in their business enterprises and endeavors. That's generally where the money comes from. Even if it's been passed down generation after generation, the Ford Foundation was set up, the Rockefeller Foundation was set up initially with industrial dollars, and from the great-grandfathers of those organizations. So we're creating an ecosystem for philanthropy to do its work around the country. We also have foundations that give internationally as well. Go ahead. So a foundation, essentially, I'm just going to breeze through some of these because I really want to get to some of the conversation. But I think the important thing, we are 501c3. Foundations are organized that way under the tax code. Now, there are a lot that fall under that 501c3. So you have nonprofit organizations, a lot of the service providers that you might be talking to and dealing with in your communities, they're organized as 501c3s, but we're different. We essentially, in the philanthropic sector, we are the givers. The rest of those service providers that are out there are essentially the receivers. That's who our sector gives money to. And a healthy nonprofit community is really, really important to the foundation community because it's nonprofit organizations that carry out the mission of foundations, whether it's something related to climate and climate change, or after-school programs, or food banks, or public education. We rely on the nonprofit system basically to deliver those kinds of services to create a better quality of life in communities. Types of foundations, they're public and private foundations. So among our private foundations are our corporate foundations, our family foundations, independent foundations that are in the grant-making business, may have been set up, some of them, a lot of these health conversion foundations, the Fannie Mae, Sallie Mae Foundation, set up the Lumina Foundation. That was the profits from Sallie Mae, created in Indiana, the Lumina Foundation for higher education. On the public side, community foundations are what they call public charity, and they manage lots of different funds to serve a variety of populations, and we'll talk more about them in a minute. Go ahead. Common characteristics of all foundations, though, are that they are non-governmental. We're part of that circle that was on that side that had the NGO. And nonprofit. They're managed by trustees. They have boards of trustees. You'll find that if you look at the board of trustees of your community foundations in your community, you're going to see possibly some very familiar names. The president of your local community college might be on that board. The head of the Chamber of Commerce might be on that board. The mayor could be on that board. Could be the high school principals on that board. You find that people in the community who are really passionate about this kind of philanthropic giving, and also at the community level, who really are people dedicated to that place in which everybody lives. And they're motivated by charitable intent. And so charitable intent is defined by the IRS. And so there are rules that foundations need to operate by, and that they have to file 990s with the IRS every year. That makes it completely transparent on where their money goes, how much money they take in, how much their salaries are of all their staff, their chief officers, and what their grant making is and who gets that. So it's very easy to find a 990 and to look up and see where that money is going. Go ahead. Looks familiar? So here are some of the products really of foundations and philanthropic giving over the years. Pell Grants, another one. Go ahead. So foundations kind of are all over the map, you know. Their interests are as varied as we have needs, human needs. So the National Gallery of Art, for instance, started with foundation contributions, and so a lot of health and research has been underwritten by foundations in many cases. Go ahead. So a private foundation has a principal fund or an endowment. Those endowments, that's one singular fund, the Gates Foundation, big endowment from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, right? So that's an endowment. That money is there in perpetuity, and so they do grant making off of the proceeds and the interest that is earned on their investments, and that's how they do their grants. They do, generally foundations do not touch what they call the corpus or the body of their money, but they do have requirements to pay out every year, right? You know this? My foundation person back here. So go ahead. Public foundations. Now public foundations, like the community foundations, they receive typically from a variety of donors. So they have lots of funds that they manage. The Kansas City Foundation, of course nobody from Kansas City here probably cheering on the Royals, right? The Kansas City Foundation operates 4,300 funds. So they have donors, they call them donor advised funds. So if they're operating 4,300 funds, imagine their reach into that region of Kansas City, right? They touch a lot of people. So partnering with them or talking to them about how to go to scale and trying to get messages out or get needs met, etc., they've got a pretty good reach. Go ahead. Just a brief history of philanthropy. Organized philanthropy was started about 100 years ago, a little bit more. And Andrew Carnegie was the first. Anybody watch the History Channel, the recent one about men who made America, right? Fascinating, fascinating. Andrew Carnegie gave away all of his money, really, essentially. It was pretty interesting. But I just got back from Cleveland. Anybody been in Cleveland lately? Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, really awful weather. Cleveland is celebrated their 100th anniversary. They are the first community foundation in the nation, organized by Frederick Goff. And we were there for our annual fall conference of community foundations. There were about 1,400 community foundation personnel who were gathered there. We sat and talked for 5 days, shared best practices, but talked about the future of philanthropy and the future of community philanthropy. And lots of philanthropy, there's a trend that's really moving toward what we call place-based philanthropy, which is good news for all of you because you're all working in a place. So there's a lot more philanthropy that's really getting more focused on let's get into place, let's engage our citizens, and let's build capacity for local communities to solve their own problems and create much better pathways for quality of life for all citizens. I just would point out we had a huge growth of community foundations in 1970, 1990. And 1990 is when the tech guys came into play. And so this is when Google and eBay and the Gates Foundation and lots of those Silicon Valley names, Silicon Valley Community Foundation has grown a lot because they've benefited from all of those entrepreneurs that are in the Silicon Valley and that San Francisco area. So the majority of foundations are private foundations. Yes, we have a fair amount of money, $622 billion, which I think is actually more than the defense budget, right? Isn't the defense budget like about 400 and some whatever? So, but 50 billion, 49 in 2011, 50 billion, almost 51 billion is given out in grants. So a lot of that money, because it's in private foundations, because it's in endowments, is in for perpetuity. So that money is not spent down. It's there for a lifetime because that was the donor's intent. Donor intent is very important. And I'll get back to this when we talk a little more about community foundations. Just a little bit more about foundation giving in perspective. So of the roughly 300 billion given now in donations in 2011, most of it comes from individuals. The biggest chunk of giving in philanthropy is really goes to the churches, to religious organizations in this country. And a lot of universities have a big chunk of money. People give big chunks of money to places like Yale and Harvard and colleges of their choice, alma maters, etc. So go ahead. I just wanted to also bring to your attention that our sector, even though it looks like it's got lots of money, we've had global pressures on philanthropy as well, as everybody has. There's just, the landscape is shifting for everybody. You all know this probably better than everyone. The landscape of conflict and war has shifted dramatically in the last 12 years for us. And so the press of technology is also changing philanthropy. What people used to do, we're seeing patterns and trends with millennials now who are choosing to give in different ways. They're not giving to foundations. They're giving because of online capability now. So we have lots of these like giving circles and websites where you can give directly. Like I give to a special education teacher in Bedford, New Hampshire, through one of those kinds of websites. And she puts up there what she needs. I need chalk, I need paper, I need this, I need that. And so people go in and they say, oh, I'll give you $25 to buy, that chalk that you need. So that's changing the face. We're talking about that. So what's the future of philanthropy, and how is organized philanthropy really reacting to that? Building on that, because our goal is to increase philanthropic giving and to create and maintain that spirit of giving, which is very truly uniquely American. International countries do not have the kind of, they have the spirit of giving, but they don't have the organized philanthropy. Most of the world looks to the United States for our models of philanthropy. We constantly host international foundations. We had a whole group at our conference who are just anxious to know how it works in the United States. How can they make it work in Bosnia, and how can they make it work in Latin American countries? The political and economic turbulence is changing the face of things. It's a lot of pressure. A lot of the international philanthropies that are funding in countries like Syria, like in Western Africa right now with Ebola. I mean, there's a lot of turbulence and really concerns about the restriction of civil society in many countries now. And foundations are very much committed and concerned about civil society and the operation of civil society across the world, growing weight of needs, and the relentless global pressures on business too. Because when businesses aren't making the kind of profits, they're not plowing that money back into their philanthropies, or they're not giving, or so it affects all of us. Go ahead. Some of the trends that are happening, we see there's an increase certainly of global wealth now. There are some very wealthy people in China now who've made a lot of money in China, but China does not have an organized philanthropic sector. Shifting roles of state, market, and civil society. There's new financial tools now. A lot of things you may hear about in impact investing and partnerships that are created where people give money now and they expect a bit of a return on that money. And if they make it, great at market rates. If they don't, that's okay too. But it's a different way. They can use their corpus that way for loans. So there's a lot of shifting going on, a lot of trends in our field that we're trying to figure out. And one of the things that our sector is definitely grappling with, and that is the diminished public resources that have supported particularly the social safety net. And coming out of this recession now, foundations have been kind of in a quandary about what to do about reduced state revenues and federal cutbacks as well for social safety net programs and for community programs, infrastructure building. We're not seeing the money invested on the public side in infrastructure, but foundations are out there trying to help create more sustainable communities and using their dollars to leverage that. It's pretty amazing to go to Cleveland and see what the Cleveland Foundation has done, to help create a much more sustainable rebuilding of Cleveland. And that's going on in a lot of our auto-centric communities when the auto industry went belly up in 2008. So there's lots of new tools that are coming to bear. Yeah, go ahead. So recent economic challenges, we've kind of talked about that. The one thing that, there's been a lot of pressure on foundations to really increase their grant making to meet needs. So the numbers of people who are unemployed in the recession, the foreclosures, a lot of basic needs. And so money was redirected toward basic needs in some cases. And so some of the other portfolios that people were used to weren't happening quite as quickly or as much because people were moving money, particularly in 2008, 2009, when we just watched in 6 and 8 months people losing their houses like crazy, and hundreds of thousands of Americans who got laid off from their jobs. So the political environment, I kind of threw that in because we're in a political environment as a sector right now. Congress is going to take up tax reform, we think, pretty soon. They're threatening to do really an overhaul of our tax system. And we've been spending, our government relations team's been spending a lot of time talking with members of Congress and the Ways and Means Committee about what would happen if they tinkered with the charitable deduction. And that's a big deal. That is a big deal for nonprofits as well, because tinkering with the charitable deduction means less money that's going to go to the nonprofit community. So we're in a coalition in Washington with about 30 other nonprofit organizations, national nonprofits, that have been trying to help Congress kind of see what the impacts will be if they start to make some changes in the charitable deduction. So, and there's a pretty big consensus across nonprofits and philanthropy about the need to maintain the charitable deduction. So a community foundation. A community foundation is publicly supported. It's got a long-term goal of building permanent funds. They have lots of donors, these donor-advised funds that come in. So if, let's just say Mary here, decided that she wanted to leave in her will $50,000 to her alma mater, for instance, or wanted to leave it to the community foundation to distribute. I shouldn't have used that, it wasn't the alma mater, but for education purposes in your community was a better example, that the community foundation could take that money and then invest that money and keep that in as a scholarship fund in your name in perpetuity, or for how long that you wanted to do that. So there are many separate donors, as I gave the example in Kansas City. Go ahead. They make good partners, very good partners. So if you have not approached your community foundation to talk about your family assistance needs, to talk about joining community forces and what that means and how that could play out in your community, I would highly recommend that you do that. They're very aware of local government and nonprofit capacity to do projects. Most community foundations, they know their nonprofit community pretty well. They know their elected officials pretty well. In many communities, the community foundation is an anchor institution in that community. They have a track record of building funder partnerships. They can call together other foundations to say, hey, here's a community need. You know, the mayor has asked us to take a look at workforce development in our community. This actually happened in Cincinnati many years ago. That Cincinnati Foundation took the lead, called together 13, 14 other foundations, and now they've got a very robust program that spun off into a nonprofit, a new nonprofit that is really focused on bringing all stakeholders together in that community to help support workforce development, training, and placement for low-skilled individuals in that community. They have a knowledge usually of local politics, who the stakeholders are. They're nimble grant makers too. So if you need somebody to make some grants for you and you've got donors that would like to give you some money, working with your community foundation, they could set up a fund specifically for joining community forces. And then you can tell any donors that call you, here's the address, here's the name of our fund, contribute to that, and then you work with the community foundation to figure out what to do with that money, how to put that out in grants, for instance, on particular topics that you might, in social areas that you're trying to address. They also have an understanding of the community's level of excitement, of tolerance, and fatigue as well. So they can tell you when the community's getting a little tired of, well, I don't know if we want to hear about, football players at the school anymore. I think we need to start talking about veterans. That's where you want to get. Go ahead. Just a few suggestions on how to build relationships with community foundations. This is going to be posted somewhere, so you'll be able to go in, I think, after this meeting. But this is our locator here. If you want to know where your community, if you see what community foundations are in your state, like New Hampshire has one, the great charitable trust, you know them, Dick Ober and that crowd. You can go in and find your community foundations that are in your state and in your region. So go ahead and let's just plow ahead because I know we're going to run out of time. More benefits. So some examples of what they're doing around veterans. So the San Antonio Foundation, the San Diego grant makers, and I'm going to pass out to you the list of the regional associations, of which San Diego grant makers is one of those. There are about 32 regional associations across the country. They are collectives of foundations in that particular region or state. They are doing community engagement strategies. The Patterson Foundation in Florida is a family foundation, and they're doing something that's very specific to what their founder and donor wanted, and that is to inform veterans and their families of their benefits, their eligibility for end-of-life benefits. And they invest in veteran cemeteries. It's a little different, but that's what Mr. Patterson wanted. I think he's a colonel, actually, Patterson. Spray Reagan Foundation is doing a documentary on suicide issues. The Delaware Valley Grant Makers and Philanthropy Northwest, which is up in the Pacific Northwest, they have veterans working groups that they have funders that are bringing in veterans nonprofits, and they're all working together to figure out their strategies. And I think I'm out of time. Where's my timekeeper person? Where did she go? She was supposed to put a sign up for me. Oh, there you are. Oh, you did. Okay, so are we done? We got like 1 minute. So, yeah, anyhow. So, I don't know, question? Somebody ask a hard question.
Do you have a vendor table out there?
Yeah, I'm someplace. I'm supposed to be out there somewhere. I'm here till tomorrow. I have 2 more tomorrow, so I'm happy to talk to any of you about any of this. So, anybody else have a hard question? Quickly? Okay, great. So, I'm from New Hampshire, by the way. That's how I know all that stuff. So, anyhow, I spent a lot of years in New England, and I live near the Vermont border. So, I'm here. Foundations, don't ask them for money. Ask them for help in implementing your strategy. Ask them to get the community together for you and with you, okay? That's what you want to go and align it with their missions and their desire to create a better quality of life for everybody in the community, including your veterans, including your service members and their families. So thank you very much.